Hey, church family, Pastor Ross back, and here for just a short minute to commend some books from the bookstore for Christmas and for just Christmas gifting or for your bookshelf or gifts for yourself. And again, the goal of the bookstore is to supplement the preaching and teaching ministry of our church and to give you good options and recommendations from the pastors and the elders of the church to encourage you of good books to have on your bookshelf. And again, there's all sorts of books that you can have on your bookshelf that are fine. But a lot of times in our lives, we have a lot of just faddish books or books that are just kind of momentary, but not timeless, classic, important books to read. And I think part of my job, is to really encourage you to direct you to the better sources and the more foundational texts that more elucidate the scriptures and the tradition of our faith from the scriptures that the Spirit is carrying along as he teaches the church the truths of the scripture. And so it's important for us to find good books. It's important for us to understand there are okay books, there are good books, there are great books, and we want to recommend maybe more of the good and the great than over just kind of the okay. So I thought again I could pick all sorts of things, but typically what we want to do in the educational ministry is help you have good doctrine and good practice married together. And very few do that as well as the Puritans, as they're called. And the Puritans, it's kind of a broad term, but there are many that would be included. It's a certain time period in history, typically in Ireland and Scotland and England, and kind of this movement against the conformist kind of Catholic, especially influenced Church of England and the Papist tradition and those things, and reacting to all of that during that long kind of stretch of time. And it's had a huge influence, of course, in America. And there are many kind of Puritan thinkers, though they're not technically Puritans from the same age, such as Jonathan Edwards and others, Martyn Lloyd-Jones and others that would be considered Puritans in the way they think and teach and preach, but not Puritans from the technical period, the time period. Okay, but we could choose anything from our bookstore. In fact, two or three books that we previously purchased have already sold out, which is great. But we have a couple new titles, and then also I bought again some others that went out, so we could continue to commend them to you. So here's just a few to commend. The first is The Glory of Christ by John Owen. This book is probably considered like kind of the 1A or 1B of the best of his paperbacks. Again, really great about John Owen is all of his works in the paperback series are abridged and edited, meaning that you're going to get the substance and the real business of his bigger work, but in a much more readable and a much more abridged, abbreviated style. And we have, I think, 4 or 5 copies of The Glory of Christ. I think it's $7 or $8. The Bruised Reed is the second one, and this is by Richard Sibbs, and probably one of the better or best known of the Puritan paperbacks. And this is a really good book, I think, to gift to someone who is a Christian who has gone through much struggle, who's gone through much trial. It is one of the most healing books you can read if you've really gone through lots of struggle as a believer, because it talks a lot about how God bruises you without breaking you, how God is constantly allowing there to be a fire without putting you out. But there's this goal and agenda in mind to make you more like Christ, to conform you more to his image. And it will take much suffering and trial and pain and many things like that. But it's because God has a great purpose, a greater purpose involved. And I think it's one of the most pastorally sensitive books on suffering and difficulty that's out there. So I think it's a really good one. I think we sell it for $7, I believe. In the bookstore. Just got this one in, and Jeremiah Burroughs is a top three for me of the Puritans. And it's called The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. I know a couple of people in our church have read this book before, but if you've read a Puritan paperback that's a classic, you're going to return to it over and over. So these are repeatable books. And this one talks about Philippians 4:12 and 13, about how to be content, how the gospel teaches contentment. This is probably a very important book for our day and age that teaches there is no such thing as contentment. There is only discontentment. And so this book is probably a very healing remedy for a very busy and distracted and a very discontent culture, I would recommend that. I think these are easy reading books, so this is not going to challenge people's literacy or reading ability at all. Okay, so I want to commend that book to you too. It's for $8. And lastly, probably a top 2 or 3 book from me in the Puritan paperbacks comes from my favorite Puritan, John Bunyan, in his book called Prayer. Now, again, it's not technically his book in the sense of the Banner of Truth kind of compiled a number of his sermons on 2 texts specifically that had to do with prayer, and it's called Prayer. But this book is probably one of the most power-packed books I've ever read in my life, and I've read it a number of times, finishing it again with one of the men in the church. And this book is basically a number of sermons over 2 passages, 1 Corinthians 14 and Hebrews chapter 4, about what prayer really is about. And I know a lot of you have just gone through the Tim Keller book on prayer. This is a great devotional book as well, a supplement to that book in many ways, but more sermons instead of teachings probably, so it's a little bit different. But this is, I think, one of the best books that you can give to somebody because of the devotional character and the discipline of prayer. So there would be a good, I think, connection and the need for most people with this book. So probably a little bit more universal in its need. So those are just 4 options. I think we have 7 or 8 that are in the bookstore. Next, for a couple bigger books, kind of both in size and maybe length. But Sinclair Ferguson's great book on how to grow as a Christian. We use the word sanctification, which means growing in the image of Jesus. And the book went out of print because it sold out a couple years, maybe last year, and they finally got it back in print. And so I snatched up a couple copies for our bookstore. And this is a really good book for those that might be confused about how people really grow. And this is pretty common. Most of the New Testament epistles are dealing with people that are confused on how to grow in the faith. It might also be a really good study book or devotional book for private study as well. Maybe less just reading, but more study. And I think we're going to sell this one for $10 in the bookstore. It's called The Blueprints of Sanctification for Sanctification. So that might be really good. And of course, the goal of the CE team, the Christian Education Ministry, is to help you have doctrine and practice married together. And like I said, Puritans are probably the safest bet on how to do that well. And this great guide is fun to read. It's really kind of snapshots of the Puritans' biographies. It gives you a guide to their readings, and it tells you where to go find these readings and these writings of theirs. It's called Meet the Puritans. And I think normally it sells for like $36. We're selling it for $18. So that's a huge deal. $18 for a book that's about 750 pages. That's a great deal. And it's really useful because it'll guide you to who you're reading if you start to get into the Puritans, which we want you to. That's what we want. We're encouraging you to get yourself involved more with the Puritan writings because the Puritans have a better way of marrying head and heart together than most do, and they're more timeless and they're proven. They're historically proven books. And then lastly, I'd be remiss if I did not promote John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion. And I think this book, there's two audiences I think this will work for. I think on one side, it's going to really encourage those that really want to dig deep into what is the Reformed faith teaching, kind of in a very much broader sense, kind of like holistically, like a worldview sense. This book will hit every, facet of that. But then on the other side, it's an incredibly good book for just a devotional in the morning. That's actually how I read it the first time a number of years ago. I just read 10 to 20 pages every morning with this. I think I finished in like 7 months. And I just, said, I'm going to sit down in the mornings or do an evening devotional and just read this and then pray. And I'll tell you, it's such an easy book to read. And it's also very warm and enriching about the truth in your life. So this book can fit a number of needs, both a devotional kind of pietistic need, and also an academic and a deeper learning need, which is a wonderful attribute of this book. And I think it typically sells for $38 on Banner of Truth, or about the same for Amazon, maybe $35, but we sell it for $30. And just a little side note, Banner sells these handsome little bookmarks for $2 or $3 on their website. So we bought a bunch and we'll just give them to you. If you buy a book for $10, that's $10 or more, that it'll come with that. And because it's just a nice way to kind of keep your place. And these would overwhelm the smaller books. So we're just going to give them with the bigger books. It kind of comes with it if you buy one. So that being said, I want to commend those to you for obviously any season, but especially for the Christmas season, as people think of ideas of giving gifts and books and good resources to believers or people in their family. We really need to populate our bookshelves with solid resources that will guide us in our faith, that are not just, momentary needs or wants, but more classic ancient truths that will get us along the ancient paths and to guide us faithfully and devoutly in the right ways. And I will tell you this: when I was in college and I had a lot of books that were not very excellent, um, I wouldn't say they misled me, but I would say that they were not as rich and they were not as stable in the way that they were guiding me. So and again, you read the scriptures, that's the first thing, but a lot of times we need good books to help us interpret them and understand them, to support our murkiness and the struggles that we have reading the Bible and hearing it and learning it in the church. And if we've got these kind of, inconsistent books on our bookshelf that we look from, or just books that try to meet maybe a passing fad or need, and we never get into the riches and the greater, timeless kind of classic books that have stood the test of time historically, we're kind of doing ourselves a disservice when we have better resources at our disposal. So we want to encourage you as a session, as elders, as pastors, to have good books on your shelf, to pull from those and to mine those, and to have them, through the power of the Spirit, guide you as you grow in your Christian faith. So I pray that if you have any questions, you can email me, stop by my office, and as you're picking up books for the Christmas Advent season. All right, signing off.